Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the San Francisco Playhouse. Woo-hoo! If it was a regular show, I'd be standing up on the stage and you would all cheer because probably of you watching the show tonight, as there are in an audience, so it's like having a full house. I feel like I have a full house. At any rate, welcome to our empathy gym. We like to think of ourselves as our community's empathy gym, where we come to practice our powers of compassion by entering the experiences of the actors through the play. We turn words into living flesh, and we hopefully go back out into our community to make it a more compassionate place. I'm also very, very proud and honored to be doing my performance, at least, and I think probably our guest's performance, on the land that the Ohlone lived on long ago and for many hundreds of years in the Bay Area. It's an honor to be on the land that these great humans pioneered and settled long before the white man came, long before the conquest of the European powers. And so I just like to thank the Ohlone for stewarding this land for such a long and beautiful time. So we've been having wonderful chats week after week with some of America's greatest playwrights, and I'm very thrilled to have such a playwright on the show tonight, whose work has been premiered at the Magic Theater, where some of you may have seen her work, also at the Classical Theater of Harlem and at off Broadway, and many opportunities off Broadway. She's a playwright I've long admired, but have not yet been able to stage on our stage. Looking forward to that happening very soon. I'd like to welcome Betty Shamieh.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Bill.
How are you?
I am fantastic. It's nice to be on the same coast with you.
Yes. Welcome to the San Francisco Playhouse.
Thank
you. You're a local girl.
Yes, I am. I grew up in Daly City, and I moved to San Carlos as a teenager. So this is home for me.
Where you are for now, but you've been in New York, been all sorts of places.
I've been in New York for a couple of decades now, but I've always considered myself bi-coastal. But San Francisco is a very special and important place to me and my extended, very large Arab American community.
It's here, yeah.
Yes.
Well, welcome. I in preparation for our conversation, I read your amazing essay in HowlRound, which I thought it was just incredible for so many reasons. And I wanted to ask you a couple things about it, just to start things going. The first paragraph, I think, was so profound, and I thought, boy, that is so right. And I don't know who is a playwright or actor or producer of color has really put it quite that way before. I want to get it up here.
Sure.
And read just a tiny bit of it, but my phone shut down. And what it says is, do you mind if I do this, if I quote you?
No, I would love that.
Okay. It's a HowlRound thing. Welcome everyone from HowlRound, by the way, because we're actually streaming nationally with the amazing platform of HowlRound, which those of you who are not theater people don't know that HowlRound is a sort of a clearinghouse for everything theatrical, and all sorts of people post on it and essays. I had one of my Empathy Gym newsletters on HowlRound once, and it was a thrill to be on it and an honor to be sharing our Empathy Gym broadcast with HowlRound. This is what Betty wrote, and I'm going to read it to you because I thought it was so profound and so correct. So correct. The debt that is owed to the Black artists, thinkers, and intellectually by we non-Black Americans of color is so immense and multi-layered it cannot be quantified. They've given us the language of revolution, integrated all white institutions, and modeled how to rise to the apex of power in America. Overwhelmingly, Black pioneers have embraced and accepted other people of color as allies, all while knowing they bear the brunt of both microaggressions in artistic spaces and the murderous violence necessary to keep a racist society in place, especially when we keep our little mouths shut. I thought that was so beautiful. So
Thank you
you're
very
good
much.
in prose too.
Well, I guess I think I would say that I'm fiery, and I think that the role of the playwright is to be an intellectual as well, and to look at our industry, but also the world. And I think actually the legacy of McCarthyism has kind of hobbled many playwrights' ability to, feel like that it's very important to engage with social issues and, and agitate and provoke, not just in our work. So I kind of feel like the legacy of McCarthyism, like the kind of fear of engaging with the hot button political issues of our time, has infected a lot of playwrights. And I'm sure a lot of them feel many of the sentiments that I articulated in that essay. But I think, I don't know who said it, and I don't know about who they said, and I wanted to research it. But somebody told a basketball player, "Shut up and dribble," when he was engaging with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right.
Right. And I kind of feel like it's like, shut up and write plays, But I'm very excited about artists like Tony Kushner or John Janae, who really engage in the political arena, and kind of like, are there in body and spirit as well as in their theater work, because you know I think it's exciting and important. And I think this time, we're kind of reckoning with all these ideas, is, it feels important, and it also feels like this is what we're supposed to do as artists and intellectuals. We're supposed to interrogate how we are uncomfortable. I mean, what I articulate in the essay also is my own complacency in kind of modeling how one, as an artist of color, represents a whole community and kind of takes the lion's share of focus, as long as you kind of stay within the strictures of not being too political or not being too bombastic in your work. You kind of are rewarded for that. And I think part of my journey as a writer and an artist and a thinker and a person is to interrogate how have I participated or gained from the structures of American theater as they currently are. It's very easy to point fingers at other people, and I, have certainly had my difficulties. I'm much more widely produced in Europe, and that's, I think, problematic and interesting also, because for most of my life, America has been at war in the Middle East in some fashion. And part of the legacy of, like I said, McCarthyism, is that we haven't inherited the 60s kind of awareness of war, possibly because most middle-class people are not drafted. So even though we are at war, there's this kind of feeling that it's not happening and it's not real, because it's not happening to a certain sector of society, and not everybody's vulnerable. So, it's very strange to know that war is going on and people are dying on both sides, and you kind of live in this bubble that in the 60s you didn't live in. You didn't have the comfort of not confronting the Vietnam War and what it meant. So that's something, this movement is very important for me to kind of continually investigate how I, as an artist, can push the industry, our beloved industry. And I think nobody comes into theater trying to, diminish other people. I mean, I say it a lot. I say it almost every time I speak. I've worked in enough cultural contexts to know that theater people, I have more in common with anybody who works in theater than somebody from my culture who doesn't love words. We're our own tribe, and part of being part of a tribe is that we make our tribe better. Just like part of being a family is calling out how we can become better, and not just pointing fingers, but also looking inward. And that's what I was really trying to do, with the last kind of decade of my career, which is working with more theaters that had less of the money and the exposure that I was used to working with, because they were willing to do the kind of work that I really felt I wanted to do. So thank you for reading my essay or part of it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. I'm kind of fascinated by your comment about McCarthyism because
Mm-hmm.
we think of McCarthyism as of being, literally 70 years ago, a long, long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a lot of great American writers careers were destroyed by McCarthyism
Mm-hmm.
forever. Some came back 20, 30 years later, you know, Waldo Salt, people like that, screenwriters in particular, but playwrights as well,
Mm-hmm.
whose careers were ruined. And we think, of course, of a play like The Crucible, which Arthur Miller wrote in a denunciation of McCarthyism. So it's interesting because I guess I sort of thought, oh, we're done with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the battles we're fighting now are different battles, but I think I'm going to think about that because in a way, the threat of suppression actually happening in this country in regards to artistic content or the political affiliations of artists is, I think, probably still pretty real.
Well, I mean, they're real also in our minds. Even the idea,
Yeah, that's exactly.
the concept of political theater doesn't exist in Europe in the same way. In that, uh, you know, and first of all, even the word political, for me, it has somebody who's kind of a BSer, somebody who kind of, fudges the truth. To be political to me is not a compliment. So when people are like, "Oh, you write political theater," I always hear it as you write things that ameliorate. Yeah, exactly. So, but that term was coined during the McCarthyism era and does not exist in other contexts. The idea that and what is also troubling is, I didn't get in this industry to write plays about Arab Americans who've lived in the last decades that I've been alive. I got in because I'm interrogating and trying to deal with the human condition. And I think sometimes when you are of a certain race, people label you as, dealing with political issues. When everybody's dealing with political issues, it's just it's just how we see it is meaning non-mainstream or non-white or non.
Right.
And the other thing that's very important for me is who gets to be white changes. For example, Eugene O'Neill, was writing at a time when there wasn't, when a Kennedy was a dream. You couldn't have a Catholic president. Um, and, A Long Day's Journey into Night is, to me, the classic immigrant play about poverty and about the kind of how you are haunted by class, even when you no longer belong to that class. And, and I feel like that could be a Black story, that could be an Arab story. And one of the things that I feel that's exciting about this movement is who gets to be universal. The concept may be expanded by this kind of, real reckoning with, because I believe that, you can't understand O'Neill unless you understand the Irish American experience, just like you can't understand August Wilson unless you understand the African American experience.
That's so
And you don't need to understand them at all. In terms of, when my play, The Black Guide, was done in Greece, it was like the easiest production of my entire universe. They called me up and said, "Let me fly you to Greece for the opening." It was like I didn't have to have any conversations. They picked up the script and they did it. And so I went there expecting for them to want to talk about, The Black Guide is about 4 Palestinian women across the ages. There's a suicide bomber. I mean, it's intense political stuff. So I thought that they were very political in that term, and that they were going to talk to me about the Middle East. They didn't ask, the whole week that I was there, they didn't ask me one question about anything except the characters' internal motivations. Nothing about the Middle East, nothing about war or violence or all the things that play is known to be dealing with. And I took the producer aside and I said, "Why would you do a play? Your economy is going to hell in Greece about 4 Palestinian women." And she said, "We saw it as a play about 4 strong people. We never, we know that they're of an ethnicity, but we know it in the way that you would know O'Neill is about Irish people. It's
right.
also about, addiction and class and all the other things." And it was shocking to me that even I kind of absorbed that idea of how it was being perceived and thought that that's how it's going to be perceived throughout the world. And that's what I mean about the legacy of McCarthyism, because he kind of divided art into political and non-political, which means dangerous to the status quo and not. Those terms didn't exist in how you talked about art before that era. So and I think that stays with us. And not only does it affect how producers see us, it affects how audiences see, artists see ourselves, which is, I think, the much more pernicious and fascinating and difficult thing to deal with, So I had an expectation that they were going to talk about my play in the way that play is talked about in America. And they did the play because they thought the characters were fascinating and fun and sexy and complicated. And I didn't have that same experience, in this, I feel, very post-McCarthy era of talking about plays as universal or non-universal, specific or universal, like I said. So I think, but I also think, one of the things about life is that we're continually changing, and the theater industry is changing, and I think we can either be freaked out by it, like as I was when I had to start working with smaller theaters and with people who were newer in the game in some ways, or we can kind of embrace it and sometimes unexpectedly wonderful things. The kind of results that you want working in the way that you think is going to happen is actually the opposite of what you need to be doing as an artist or person in the world. So that's been my experience so far.
Yeah, well, I'm 100% with you. I mean, because it's interesting, because I have often said that I don't really feel that theater, at least the theater that I embrace, my own. I don't criticize anyone for doing anything they want to do. I mean, the San Francisco Mime Troupe is avowedly political theater.
Right.
Right. But I'm not interested in espousing a political position or trying to convince someone to hold a point of view that I hold. I'm just not. I'm interested in trying to get people to identify with a position that they don't understand.
Yeah.
They have the whole just walking a mile in somebody's shoes that they didn't think they could ever be in,
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for, I agree with you. I'm looking for stories that resonate, that are from specific ethnic sources, whether it be Italian Americans or Palestinian Americans or Chinese Americans or Black Americans or Indian Americans, like Yoga Play. I mean, there's a play, that play is about a specific ethnic groups.
Absolutely.
And about the appropriation of culture, and yet it's completely universal. We all completely get that. Everyone does. And that's what I'm always searching for, is stories that may be embedded in a specific, racial community, but they resonate for everyone,
Yes. And one of the ways that I've really, after the Great Depression, people only wanted to write comedies. And I feel like I'm in a space where I really think how we reach each other is to laugh together and laugh at ourselves and laugh at each other and laugh at the human condition. So I'm really, and it's something that most people who have seen Roar or The Black Eyed or Territories would not expect from me. And but I think it's a knee-jerk reaction. It happened after, like I said, the Great Depression, that people really wanted to find ways to laugh, and that's very exciting to me. I think that, I don't know. I think comedy does something to us that is so exciting, and if you can laugh with each other, then you can get through anything. And the thing about laughter is it's the great equalizer. Wit is the way to make anybody see that not only are you walking a mile in somebody else's shoes, you're actually in their shoes and you didn't even notice, because we're all in the same shoes. So I'm really excited about the opportunities because I grew up, and everyone says, oh, this live streaming theater, it's terrible, it's this and it's that. I grew up a world away from Broadway. I saw a few productions of ACT as a kid, you know, but how I came to the theater is I listened to cassettes at the Daly City Library. And there were wonderful cassettes of not even musicals, but plays, and on my little Walkman. And what I'm encouraging people who are frustrated with the lack of theater is to listen to plays. Like we're writing blueprints, kind of like symphonies, and we're not and not everybody in the theater wants to hear this, but I'm like, we can't compete 100% with the visual medium of film, but we can certainly compete with, opera. And I feel like I understood theater from listening to those plays. So, I'm really encouraging people to support the theaters and see these plays, but also understand you can listen to them if it's very stressful or it doesn't feel as compelling to watch, because that's how I got introduced to theater. And I think that, and the reason I mention that is because we all are isolated, and especially, how I get energy is to go see. Somebody told me, Edward Albee was in Texas for a long time, and a friend of mine was also there where he was teaching. I don't remember which university, but he was in residence for a long time. And they say he went and saw everything that was happening in, I think it was Houston. He saw, whether the big or the small. And that's the kind of artist I am. I like to sit in a theater. I'll sit in a college production. I'll sit in a high school production. I'll sit in a theater that's aesthetic I have a problem with, and or politically, I'll sit in theaters, to be that I'm like, what the hell are you doing with this much money? But just the chance to be in a theater is very exciting for me. But I do think we can gain so much by listening to these productions, and I'm excited to see what SF Playhouse is going to do with this opportunity, because it also in some ways equalizes the experience in the way that, me sitting in Daly City, stumbling upon these plays, being able to listen to the Duchess of Malfi and Shakespeare plays on little cassettes gave me access to a world that I might not have otherwise. And so maybe this time we'll be giving, young female artists of color like me who are sitting in libraries or streaming a chance to engage in a way that or in a way that they can't till they're older and have more resources than I had. So I'm excited about what this is going to do to our community. I have no doubt we are going to continue to survive and thrive, and but how we work may have to morph. Like my last few commissions have been university theaters, and I think they've kind of they pay me to come teach for a semester and write, basically, but teach one class a week, not a full-on load. And I kind of feel like it's the Medicis of our time, like how we do theater and how we fund it has to change. And that's terrifying, but it is what it is. And we've got to, embrace it.
Well, the foundations are really shifting their focus towards the development of young playwrights of color. I mean, I think most of the foundations that support playwriting are that's all they're doing.
I see, but here's the thing. I feel like, and what I kind of tried to delineate in the essay, 50 years ago, there weren't Black people on the stage. I think it was Joseph Papp who put them in Shakespeare, and then it turned into this system where, and I'm not speaking about SF Playhouse, but in New York, it felt like every off-Broadway did one artist of color.
Yeah.
And if you did Betty, you certainly weren't going to do another Middle Eastern or Indian or African American in your season. So you were competing for that one slot.
Right.
With every other person of color.
You described it as being the chosen one.
Exactly. And the chosen one has to beat out all the other messiahs and make it to the cross and get nailed, to be like, you get to, but you're competing for that one slot. So I feel like what is happening now is kind of not a correction, but a kind of, this is also happening when most theaters are shut down. And so, really, what huge advantage. And my deep hope, and that's kind of what I tried to get into, in the Do We See Ourselves essay, is that it isn't about, because there have always been artists of color in the last 20 years, but are they the artists who are really challenging audiences? I don't think if you're a theater and you suddenly do the same artist of color that you've been doing for the last 20 years, that's not, it doesn't.
Well, it's like kind of a game. It's like who's going to be our playwright of color this year, kind of, right?
Absolutely.
That's been a classic example of the way American theater has tended to work.
Yeah, even women. I mean, when the Lilly Awards came out, when I moved to New York, it was a year, like, I think Playwrights Horizon had no women playwrights and one female director, and it ignited the Lilly Awards. So I think that maybe that is kind of how integration of institution happens, now. But what it started happening was you used to have that one female playwright. You know what I mean? And so if you did a female of color, you hit both of them, and then you didn't have to worry about being tagged as the off-Broadway theater that had no women, or so it's not just about race. It becomes about how do you prevent yourself, how do you do the minimum so that you're not targeted, which theater is very hard. It's hard to make, it's hard to live, and I think the idea that we're always going to get it right, like I say in the essay, I did things and I put out plays in certain orders because I was trying to do things right, and it actually ended up being wrong. But the idea that we all have to be right all the time and that we can't evolve and grow is something that I think is detrimental to us as a community, because I believe we are a community. We're weirdos. We are weirdos. We put lights on, and then we have people pretend that they're real and everybody's quiet. Do you know how hard it is to get people to shut up, like at a dinner party, or just listen to you? But we like making people shut up and listen and pretend things are real. I mean, if you think about it, if like an alien came down and saw the things that we do with our lives and our emotions and our careers, they'd be like, who are these strange people? There's no evolutionary function to this. So we are a community, and I think that we have to, grow together like any family, because that's how I feel about the American family. For a long time, I mean, it's very to be produced, to be in a society that says and applies for grants, saying we believe in diverse writers, and having to go to Europe to get major productions of world premieres for over a decade. That's deeply painful, because I feel like a daughter of the American theater. And so when you're the stepchild, or when you're the child who's not embraced, it's painful. And I think that some of what is happening in our theater is deep pain, and I certainly feel it and felt it, and how I dealt with it, being the stubborn person that I am, was find different ways to create theater here. Whereas most people, I think, would have packed it up and moved to London a long time ago in my position, because it was so much easier. But I'm stubborn, and I'm American, and I believe my voice should be heard here. And basically, I'm stubborn. But but I do think we have to grow together. We have to fail together. We have to fail better. We have to become an industry that says, okay, we're going to do that one playwright. Okay, maybe let's interrogate that. Maybe let's tip the scales, and then feel like we have to do performatively only young female playwrights of color, and let's tip it back. And we are going to self-correct. Is there a doorbell?
No, never mind.
Okay, but
do you know how when Amazon comes, they ring the doorbell?
Yes.
You don't have to go there, because they've just put a package by your door.
Oh God! Yay, Amazon!
I guess I'm admitting to using Amazon, so it's all.
Well,
I'm confessing. I confess. I was thinking
You're
that,
outing yourself, Bill.
yeah, I
Yeah.
find myself nationally on Howrah. Oh my God,
It's okay.
so humiliating. But I was
Well, the,
thinking, if is there are there ways in which you could articulate, be open about this? Because I think it's interesting the difference between being an Arab American playwright and being a Black American playwright, because there is so much enmity for Arab states in the Middle East. Don't you? Do you think that that's? Could you be
well,
a little bit more specific about why you think it is you have to take your plays to Europe?
oh, Bill, I was not trying to take my place to Europe. European theaters were finding me, were
Yeah, yeah.
interested, you know what I mean? And
Well, no, but I
and
mean, why you think that the
why
American?
that happened? Um, I I think why it happened was what I tried to allude to was when I wrote plays like Roar, which were not deeply challenging, which were Arab on Arab violence, which didn't kind of interrogate what it felt like to grow up in a place like San Francisco and know that people were deeply racist, and felt justified in feeling racist against your people, but like you personally. And that's been my experience. Like
Right.
people, what I say about people like Obama is they see him as exceptional, meaning he's the exception to the rule that Black men are this way. So they're exceptional. The rule doesn't have to change. So I, grew up in what everyone feels is a liberal society, where it's okay to act like Arabs don't need human rights, or that, I mean, the reasons we went to war in the Middle East, and the reasons the democratic and liberal and artists did not rise up in the way that they did in the 60s to say, what are we doing and why and what is it costing us, you know is deeply painful. And the only way I could understand it is, to have grown up in Daly City with wonderful neighbors who loved me, who spent every holiday making block parties with my family, who were deeply racist and afraid. And also, I went to a small Catholic school called Our Lady of Mercy in Daly City, um, where we had a nun who would make us jump under the desks and cover our heads because she thought that the Russians were coming. So as a child, I had nightmares that the Russians were coming to get me. And when 9/11 happened, I was in New York. That was my first year actually in New York. Um, and I realized, oh no, there's going to be little kids who think, you know what I mean, that it's going to be scary to go drive on bridges, because that's how, we thought it was going to happen in 9/11, that there were going to be more attacks. And, it was a crazy, crazy time. But I within my relatively short lifetime, the fear of being killed by atomic bomb was turned to the fear of terrorism. And
It's true. It's true.
so I understood intimately, and I understood intimately what that fear looked like, because I had that instilled in me as an Arab girl growing up in Delhi City against another race of people I had never met. And so, um, so I think what happened is I started really trying to engage and challenge audiences, because I had done plays like Roar, which, Roar is, many people think it's my best play. It's a well-made play. It's my version of a streetcar. A sexy aunt comes and kind of messes up a household, and then she leaves. So it's and Streetcar is one of my favorite plays in the universe. So, but it's also not a deeply challenging play, and I was very considered in what plays I showed when in my career, and what I thought would happen, which was, people would postpone indefinitely productions of Roar that were slated for their seasons, or I would get emails that said, we really want your play, but we feel like you might be challenging, or uh, uh, so what kind of happened was, I feel like a little bit that my career, once I started to saying, okay, I've shown you that I have the chops to do a well-made play. Now let me talk about things that are really on my mind and interesting and in experimental ways. There wasn't room for that in the culture. Um, And this is also to say there wasn't room for that in the culture of the Yale School of Drama model of how you make plays, which is you go off Broadway and you become the chosen one. So when that was how I understood how to become a playwright. And had I not, I might have stayed in San Francisco, where I have a huge, loving, wonderful community and family. I had a model for how you succeed. And it didn't work for me the minute I
Right.
stepped off the path of
There was a
creating
moment
plays.
that had been presented to you as a part of the American dream. You
Exactly.
write the play which expresses your ethnicity but does not challenge the status quo and
Absolutely.
kind of fits into the game.
Right.
And then that is how I think, many people grow up. Of course, I think that San Francisco Playhouse has basically begun with the idea of challenging audiences. It's a big part of what we do, and I think the audiences that we have want to be challenged. But how much do they want to be challenged? Like I have to look. I mean, I look at myself too, and I like in the same way you're talking about. In the same way you're talking about with having to look at the sort of falseness of that approach, that you weren't being as honest about what you had in your heart to say as you could have been. I wonder, I'm still processing so much, but as a theater leader, I think, what is my job right now? I guess I still think it's to find stories which live embedded in a community, but which still speak to everyone.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And
But
and 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 I have such empathy for people like you who have devoted your lives to creating institutions like the SF Playhouse, and because they deserve to survive and thrive, uh, and it's a challenge and it's a service, and I'm very excited about the next chapter. I'm excited to see what your season will bring, and yeah.
I think I often describe when I talk to people about playwriting, I often describe playwrights as the prophets of our time, because there's never been a play in the history of theater that didn't succeed in its own time. I had a history theater professor tell me that my freshman year in college. And I said, "Oh, come on. There must be a play that wasn't discovered for a couple hundred years." Or like artists, right? Like
Yep.
Van
Yep.
Gogh, like so
Hmm.
many great artists and novelists and composers. They're ahead of their time and they don't get noticed until they're dead. But that just isn't
Hmm.
true of playwrights. It's never, ever happened. And I tried to prove him wrong, and I couldn't. Because a play is by necessity of the moment that it's
Hmm.
happening in front of the people that it's being done for, who live in the world they live in. The playwrights are people with more sensitive antenna that can pull down information out of the tumult that the rest of us are missing and translate it into a story that can help us see ourselves. That's really what I believe about plays and about playwriting. And the challenge to you, of course, here we are in a pandemic, in a pandemic and a revolution, right? In the
Hmm.
American theater. What's the prophecy? You know, what do people need to hear? What are you thinking about that not even necessarily a plot, but a way of telling a story? Or what are people going to, when we come back out to the theater, what do we need?
um, well, here's something I've been advocating for a decade, and that is theater. Uh, we cannot compete with film or live streaming, nor should we try to. The people who are going to be attracted to theater are people who love the live experience. And that may be a limited audience, and that may be dependent upon the kindness of universities in the way that we were dependent on the kindness of Medici's in the but I think something that is really important to me is that we continue to look for stories that can only exist or exist best in the theatrical form. And that means how and who and for whom we make plays. Theater used to be the center of the culture. That's how Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller became household names. Their plays became movies that movie stars did. But the idea of a well-made play or a family drama was really an important component of what made American theater American, as opposed to, the craziness of Sartre or Genet or Beckett. And I think that we need new forms, but we need to also kind of embrace our weirdness and our theatricality, and the kinds of plays we produce are going to be different, because I think the kind of well-made sort of situation has been taken over by film and streaming. So I think that theater will never die. There will always be people who need, and like me, and love that live experience, who get energy out of sitting in a room with 100 people or 20 people and laughing at an actual comedy that's live, that's precarious, that somebody may fall down. So I think the thing is that we need to have hope. And the other thing is, who is more adept at surviving than theater people? Who is more adept at improvising? Who is more adept at making something out of nothing than us? So I have a lot of hope and excitement. But I think one of the things we need to do is really embrace our opportunity to be more engaging politically, artistically, than other forms, and be at the forefront of intellectual thought.
I think that the theater, by its very nature, is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we're doing an interview and we didn't plan this out, we didn't have an outline. There's a spirit of danger, because we could get in a big fight over something. Who knows? We could have said anything, and people don't know what we're going to say, right?
Yes.
There's that spirit of danger, even in this interchange. But I think in theater, that spirit of danger is, I think, what is essentially theatrical, because you don't know that it will go right. You don't know what will happen, because we all know it can go wrong, or it could go it could go off the rails, or we don't really know what's coming up next. And I think that's what you're saying about the well-made play. I think the time of the well-made play has come and gone. I think it's time for unwell-made plays, or plays which we don't know how they're going to go. We don't know what this character is going to do. We don't have any idea what this motherfucker is going to do. And I see that on national television, Howl Round. We just
all the
don't
way
know.
around.
To me, that's the thing that draws me the most, is when I start reading a play and I have no idea what these people are going to do, but I can't stop reading, right? Or I can't stop watching, because they're so focused on who they are and what they're doing that I just have to follow them so that I can find out what they're going to do,
Yeah. And, the other thing that's, when I was coming out of drama school, everyone was like, who's the protagonist in your play? Who's the protagonist? And they had this idea that there's one person and I don't know if it's because I come from a Middle Eastern tradition, or because I really like to mess with that. There's not one person whose story it gets to be. You've got to give everybody their moment. And, the reviews of Roar are like, first I thought it was the daughter, and then I thought it was the mom, and then you realize it's actually the aunt, and I was like, what does this need to make one person, so even that's an explosion of the idea of, this is Willie Loman's story, or this is Blanche's story. That's, or this is, Mary's story in A Long Day's Journey. Like I think even that is a way to kind of poke holes in the idea of,
Right.
because you don't know how you're going to feel about these people and who you're going to end up liking. And it may not be the person you were supposed to like or supposed to care about. So even in that way, I think theater can dislocate an American audience who's used to, there's one person whose story I'm following and this is the person I identify with. And I'm so excited. I'm really excited about the theater that's going to come out of this time. And, for me as a playwright, it usually takes 18 months to write a play. And so, 6 months of being holed up, that seems about normal to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, seems about right. I'm sure the directors and actors.
I've had a lot of your colleagues, a lot of your playwright colleagues have said that on this very show. They say, "Hey, I stay home. I write. I stare at the wall. This is no big deal.
Absolutely.
This is not so different, But, wow. Well, thank you so much for joining me. We went over our usual length a little bit, but I think that what you said about breaking down the protagonist, because that's like Aristotle, right? So that's the very beginning of Western tradition of theater, started then in the Greek theater, and then Aristotle said there is a protagonist. And we all have been for 2,500 years going, oh yeah, for sure, you're right, Aristotle, got to be that way, And I think this is, and it's, the protagonist concept of drama has been getting broken down for some time. But I think, this is a time to take a look at all of those kind of, assumptions we make about theater and find ways to just rip it up and tear it up and throw it out there in a different way that we can then see what happens, see what makes it dangerous,
Yep.
Great. Well, Betty, thank you so much. It's such a
Bill.
pleasure to get to talk to you. And we'll have to, since we're so far apart, I'm in Point Richmond, so I'm just across the bay from you.
Okay, we'll have to have a social distance.
Have to meet up. We'll have to meet up for a distance coffee at like 12 and shout at each other or something.
Oh, that would be great.
Anyway, thank you for coming. And thank all of you at home in your theater seats, hopefully with something to eat and something to drink, because it's kind of dinner time. That we had scheduled, so we're going to put that off. Next week, we're going to have Fireside Cocktails with Susie, and Susie's guest is going to be Stacey Ross, who is a legendary San Francisco actor and has been on our stage and every other stage in the Bay Area many, many times. The luminous Stacey Ross will be with Susie, and they will have cocktails. You will find out what that cocktail will be, so you can have one too. And then the following Monday, we're going to do a play called Two Pigeons Talking Politics. See, here we are, back to politics. The play is called Two Pigeons Talking Politics by Lauren Gunderson. So we'll hope you all tune in for all of these, our weekly TV shows. I never thought I would be in television. And now I have 2 weekly television series. So thank you. And thank all of you who, when you bought your free ticket to see this show, made a donation, because obviously keeping the theater going is a very challenging problem for us right now. And those of you who contribute both before the show and after, when you get the thank you email, will be tremendously helpful. Thank you once again. Thank you all of you who tuned in to Howl Round. It's been great sharing this conversation with you. And we hope to see you again real soon. Bye.